20-25% male to female population there. In the art program, I feel like, thinking back, it was almost out of like my group of painters who I always had class with, I almost feel like not half, but like 30 to 40% of the class was men.
Okay.
Was guys. And and it was I mean, when I decided to transfer up there, that certainly was a consideration. I was like, oh, this is interesting, going to Texas Women's University. But again, I just went, I don't know, it just felt like the right place for me to be.
Sure.
And yeah, so I was like, well, I'm just gonna do this. Just the name, in the same way that, I'm sure we'll talk about me going to TCU, but Texas Christian University, it's just a name.
Right.
Right. So it's not necessarily descriptive of all the people there and the way the school handles itself. But anyways, yeah. So. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and Denton has a pretty good reputation for being pretty artsy and alternative. And it seems to be a pretty growing arts community. Mm-hmm. And I guess part of that is, just being a college town, in essence, between TWU and University of North Texas, right? Yeah. I mean, I still love Denton. I don't, of course, make it up nearly as often as I used to, but that is, it was such a great place to spend a few years when I went to, when I was in college. And, of course, I mean, both UNT and TWU, the art schools and just the vibes of the community were, it was great. It's a little different now. I mean, it's grown a lot over the past, just over 10 years since I've lived there. It's changed a bit, but
is it feeling a little bit more hipster?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and it's really strange. Like, I think right when I left is when, just off the square, they started kind of putting up these like bigger apartment buildings and things like that, and it's just strange. I wonder, like, I go up there and there's like, little cocktail bars and, not fancy restaurants, but, nice restaurants like what I'm used to having here in Fort Worth or in Dallas or whatever. And I wonder, I'm always like, who's eating at these? Like, when I was a student, I couldn't afford to go. Like, I'm not going to buy a $15 cocktail and go to like a restaurant like this. So I'm curious who is the clientele of these places. Right. But
instead of ramen and Blue Ribbon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that kind of confuses me a little bit. I'm curious about that aspect of it, how it works. But yeah.
Right. So after TWU, did you decide to go to grad school right away, or was there some space in there?
No, I went straight to grad school, and that was so when I was studying painting. I can't remember actually. It might have been when I was still at Northlake or very early on at TWU. I knew it was like, oh, I want to go get an MFA. So I had that goal in mind, and I worked accordingly. Right. During my time at TWU, and which goes back to the appeal of that school and having my own studio where I would go up there and just work all the time, and knew how to kind of break into the building so I could sneak in and get into my studio late at night, which was awesome, convenient. Having a building that was that old and easy to find a window that you just opened and jumped in. And anyways, yeah, so I knew that I wanted to try to get into grad school, and I applied all over the place, and ultimately, ended up at TCU in Fort Worth. And to be honest, at the time, school wasn't really on my radar all that much. I knew that casting a wide net when it comes to places to potentially go to school, and then the more I learned about it, the faculty who were there, some of which are still there, many have retired since I left. It was a good place to go and to end up, and went straight in.
So I mean, you have a pretty identifiable style when we look at your work today. But what about your undergrad? Had you gotten to this point in undergrad, or were you still? What did your work look like back then?
Well, my by the time I got to slightly more developed work, I guess, as an undergrad, the first body of work were these big, very gestural kind of ab-ex style paintings.
Right.
And again, going back to my comfort in being a drawer, they became actually very drawerly, for lack of a better word. But I used like cattle markers and oil sticks and things I could just directly draw into them. And so that was a body of work from undergrad. And by the time I did my BFA show, that work slowly began to grow in size. And so I did a painting. It was like 3 panels, but I think each panel was like 6 by 7 feet. And they were all attached, side by side in a row on the wall. And then I built out these kind of sculptural elements to them. So they slowly kind of they were kind of starting to spill off the wall a little bit.
Right.
And parts of them kind of crawled off, say, the edge of the painting itself and kind of cascade onto the wall. And so slowly kind of emerging to becoming kind of a 3-dimensional thing, and which is something I really dove into when I got to grad school. And something that's present in my work.
Right.
Still.
And so it was in grad school when you started kind of fine-tuning what we see today?
Yeah. I mean, there was actually in my first semester, I think I went through a pretty quick kind of transformation in the work where I abandoned painting, and by the end of my first semester, I was actually just doing works on paper. I was drawing, just graphite on paper, sometimes cutting up the paper, and just these kind of broad blocks were getting kind of cut out. And then I would fold and staple the paper right to the wall, so I'd have these kind of almost like pillowed kind of drawings that would get constructed right on my studio wall, and that is actually what those installations, which I always referred to as drawings. Fluorescent lighting became a common element in the works, and extension cords and paper and all these.
Yeah, I think I saw an image from one of your recent shows at Cris Worley where there was like a corner where you had an installation where there was some fluorescent lighting and marks that appear to be on the wall, marks that appear to be coming kind of a net where it just it's kind of spilling off of the wall.
Yeah.
And that it's pretty interesting. And
I got more so with the work in grad school, they were as very much these like very kind of physical constructions and very heavy, I guess, in terms of their theatricality and how they responded to a space and the lights and all these elements. And then eventually I've gotten, and it's present in my work, I guess, in a lot of ways, but I got more neurotic, I think. And so I started doing these cutout line drawings, like scribble all over a piece of paper and then decide I'm going to I'm just going to cut away all the white of the paper and just be left with the graphite drawing. And
so that's is that one of those there?
Yes. Yeah.
That is. I was wondering if that was where you had actually taken an Xacto knife and cut away all the negative space.
Yes.
And that is. I can't imagine the amount of hours. That just makes me tired thinking about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's Yeah, and so I have like that piece over there. I have some that are just meant to be these kind of singular, just little objects. I guess.
So that's paper,
Mm-hmm.
and wow. So what is it, like a Strathmore, like a really heavy, paper? Or is
the thickest paper I use actually is just like a 90-pound Stonehenge is the paper.
Uh-huh.
It's it's a good paper. It's a relatively inexpensive. I think I first discovered it in maybe a printmaking class in undergrad.
Okay.
And but actually but sometimes I'll just use actually like a photo backdrop paper.
Right.
Because you can get giant rolls of it.
Right.
And so like the installation at Cris Worley's that I did a couple years ago, there was it was made up of a bunch of different kind of cutout drawings, but the kind of back, what am I trying to say? The kind of base of it was like a 7-foot by 8-foot cutout grid, and so to get a grid that big, I was like, I need the photo backdrop paper, and it's obviously it's a pretty thin paper, and so that one is actually on the photo backdrop.
So would
paper.
you create the grid in Photoshop or anything, or is it all handmade marks?
Oh yeah, no. So yeah, at this point, I certainly use the computer now in my work, but with that's all hand drawn and
the mark are the marks are they graphite or are they paint or ink or what?
Yeah, it's all just graphite. And so this was still, around the time that I was making the cutout drawings, I was slowly transitioning back into painting. But they, these are all just graphite on paper and spray it down with fixative, and then I just go and cut them out. And they take time, and I don't do as many of them as I used to, but they,
right.
I got quicker and quicker at it, where sometimes they don't take as long as they did when I first started.
Right. Right. Oh, that's it's really interesting. So, that kind of goes hand in hand with these installations, which some of them, the one I'm looking at here on your computer seems pretty large scale. That's probably like 7 by 15 feet or something.
That was part of the group MFA show that we did at TCU. And so that's at the Fort Worth Contemporary Arts Gallery. And I bet that it's probably, 12 feet tall and then 20-ish feet across.
Sure.
Yeah. And that at the time, that was definitely the biggest piece I'd done. At the time. So
the your inclination to move away from that, is it just wanting to go in a different creative direction, or was there something about the scale of it and its the portability that kind of influenced you? Because installations are kind of they're kind of one-off and are going to be specific to specific spaces,
right? Yeah.
And so what led you towards this versus that, or do you continue both bodies of work as we go?
Well, no. So I did on one hand doing the installations, which I did right at the end of grad school, and then for the first maybe year or two out of grad school, I was pretty active with making them. I had a piece in like the 2011 Texas Biennial, and that one was down in Houston, and those were on one hand those were really great because I could just roll my paper up and take all my lights and just threw them all in the back of my car, and I could go wherever and just install it, and everything got reused. So it just became like I started to accumulate more and more stuff. And so that was convenient for a while, but then I did start to get burned out on it, and I got bored with them. So I went through this like subtle, or just kind of slowly transitioned back into making paintings or more kind of singular works. And And I guess the